I made a lot of videos about moving to San Francisco, and honestly, most of them are pretty positive. This one isn't though. And this is not going to be one of those videos where I tell you what's wrong with San Francisco and then immediately give you a rebuttal for why it's actually fine. These are real serious problems our city's facing. The fentanyl crisis, the transit system, the schools downtown, the budget, the cost of living that's pushed so many people out of here. If you're thinking about moving here, I think you should understand what's actually going on. By the end of this video, I'm going to show you how we got into this mess, what the city's trying to do about it, whether any of that is working, and why, despite all of that, I'm sticking around. Let's start with the darkest truth. In 2023, San Francisco recorded 806 overdose deaths that year, and more than 80% of them involved fentanyl. Those aren't statistics. Those are real people, people's sons, people's daughters. It is one of the most heartbreaking things about this city. And if you've seen videos of San Francisco online, there's a good chance that this is the image that sticks with you. And it is real. The Tenderloin is the most visible example. You're gonna come across signs of the crisis though in Soma and along a lot of busier commercial corridors. I see signs of this myself even in neighborhoods like the Mission and the Castro. You're gonna see people openly using drugs, people experiencing a mental health crisis, or people passed out on the sidewalk. Those moments do happen here, and it doesn't help to pretend they don't. Okay, now the city has changed its approach. There's much more enforcement, more outreach, more treatment. Narcan is much easier to get. So is it working? There are signs things are better than they were a couple years ago, I think. And the truth is, overdose deaths have come down from the 2023 peak, but I think it's way too early to declare a victory here. This definitely, in my opinion, is San Francisco's biggest challenge. The other thing I want to tell you if you're considering a move here is you can't assume that what you see in one neighborhood is going to represent the whole city. One thing that still amazes me, of course, is how you turn the corner and you're in a completely different neighborhood. You can leave an area that is visibly struggling and quickly find yourself somewhere with families and dogs and neighborhood cafes. It's crazy, but both realities exist. If you're new here, my name's Clay Jeffrey. I'm a real estate agent in San Francisco besides making these videos, and my team helps people relocate here every week. I'm not here to convince you to move to San Francisco. I'm here to help you figure out if it's actually right for you. And now let's get into kind of a complicated truth. Okay, so the first thing is that the San Francisco United School District has lost thousands of students, and it's faced serious financial problems. But declining enrollment is not the only concern. Depending on the source where you get the information, the school district is going to land somewhere around the middle to the upper third of California. So this isn't a situation where every public school is failing. The problem is those averages hide how different one school can be from another. Not just from what I read, but what I get from parents. And high school is where a lot of parents start to get really concerned. Okay, now this gets personal for me because living with a 14-year-old starting her freshman year at a Catholic high school this fall, this is something we've been through. What really stands out, about 30% of San Francisco kids go to private school, including Catholic schools. That's far above the state average. For some families, private school is a preference. Then there's the assignment system with public schools. Unlike in the suburbs, you buy into a school district. Here, living near a school doesn't necessarily guarantee your kid's gonna attend it. Families get to rank their preferred schools, but when there are more applicants than seats, the school district uses enrollment priorities and random assignments to determine placement. That's why people call it the school lottery. Now the district is trying to make the lottery more predictable, get its finances under control, and put the resources into the schools that remain. Is it working? The process has gotten a little more predictable, and plenty of families do have a good experience with the public schools. But parents are still navigating a complicated system with very uneven options. If you're moving here with kids, I wouldn't automatically rule out the public schools, but I would research the individual schools carefully and understand the assignment process before choosing a neighborhood. Okay, for those of you that have kids in San Francisco or have gone through the school lottery system, I really would love to know your thoughts in the comments below, because I know families have had very different experiences with this. Okay, so our city's public transit is facing some serious financial issues. Muni has been working to close a budget gap of more than $300 million, and BART is projecting a shortfall of roughly the same size. Those numbers are big, but here's what actually matters. Neither system has figured out how to permanently replace all the money it lost when ridership dropped. People are riding again, but hybrid and remote work changed commuting patterns. The systems were built around huge numbers of people traveling into offices 5 days a week around the same times, and that has not come back. So here's what they're trying to do. They've cut costs, eliminated vacant positions, increased fare enforcement, and relied on temporary state funding to avoid major service reductions. The longer-term plan is going to depend on voters. They're going to need to approve a new regional and local funding plan. Is it working? In the immediate term, yes. Regular service has been protected for now. Long term, we don't know. Without permanent funding, the system may eventually have to reduce service, raise fares, or both. This is going to matter even if you don't ride every day. Transit affects the traffic, downtown's recovery, workers' ability to get around, and how the neighborhoods can feel connected. The system itself hasn't collapsed. The real problem is they still haven't figured out how to pay for the system long term. If you expect to rely on transit, look closely at the specific lines serving the neighborhood you're considering. Close to public transportation doesn't always tell you how practical the trip will be every day. Okay, the transit is a little abstract, but let's talk about where you actually can see it. Walk through downtown and you're gonna feel it. As of mid-2026, more than 1 out of every 4 square feet of office space in San Francisco is empty. That's better than it was, but downtown still has a long way to go. Some blocks are busy again, particularly in the middle of the week. Others still feel unusually quiet. There are fewer office workers, fewer customers for restaurants and shops, and less of the everyday downtown energy we had before 2020. When fewer people come downtown, restaurants lose business, retail struggles, transit loses riders, commercial property values and tax revenue fall. One problem starts feeding into the other. So what's the city trying to do? Part of the plan is pretty simple. Bring companies and workers back. And right now, AI companies are leasing a lot of that office space. The city is also trying to make downtown less dependent on offices by adding events, supporting ground floor businesses, encouraging housing, and making certain office to residential conversions easier. The goal is to make downtown more like an actual neighborhood, somewhere people live and spend time after 5 o'clock, not simply a place people commute to and from work. So is this working? There are real signs of progress. More companies are signing leases, vacancy is finally coming down, and AI companies are taking a lot of that space. But I wouldn't call downtown recovered. Most of the activity is going into newer, nicer buildings and the parts of downtown where these companies actually want to be. Older buildings and quieter corridors have a harder road ahead. Turning offices into housing sounds great, but a lot of those buildings are really hard and really expensive to convert. The layouts, the windows, the plumbing, it just doesn't always work. I don't think downtown is going to be exactly what it was. The question is, can it become something new quickly enough to support the businesses and residents that are already there? If you're considering living downtown, look carefully at the exact block. The experience can change dramatically within just a few streets. San Francisco just approved a record $16.9 billion budget. That sounds like an enormous amount of money, and it is, but the city still had to close a shortfall of more than $640 million over the next 2 years. That sounds like a lot of government accounting, but here's the point. Look, the basic problem is that the city's expenses have grown faster than the money coming in. Downtown's decline that we just talked about is a major reason. Commercial property values fell a lot. Offices and hotels are generating less revenue. And at the same time, salaries, benefits, healthcare, and the cost of running the city department kept rising. So what's the city trying to do? They're cutting spending, leaving some open jobs unfilled, holding off on new programs, and keeping more money in reserve in case federal funding gets cut. They're also hoping more businesses, activity, tourism, and real estate sales will bring tax revenue back. Is it working? For now, they balanced the budget and avoided some of the worst cuts people were worried about. But the larger problem isn't solved. Okay, so what does that mean when you live here? It affects how clean the streets are, how quickly the city responds to problems, how many police and public health workers it can afford, and how well basic city services will actually function. Hey, if I haven't scared you off yet, and you're still considering a move, that's probably a good sign. My team and I help people do this every week. Our contact information is below. Okay, now let's talk about the people that left. Hey, San Francisco's always been expensive, but during the pandemic, many people decided the city was no longer worth the price. When offices closed and people could work from anywhere, thousands of people left. Some wanted more space, some wanted lower costs of living, some wanted different schools, others simply fast-tracked a move that was maybe going to happen in 5 years to the suburbs, and a lot of people just didn't want to pay San Francisco prices when so much of what they loved was temporarily shut down. Okay, by the Census Bureau's 2025 estimate, San Francisco had about 826,000 people, still roughly 6% below where we started in 2020. And affordability hasn't improved. By June 2026, average advertised rent across the city was about $4,400 a month. This makes it harder for teachers, first responders, service workers, and young families to stay. And here's the thing, you could make what would be a great income almost anywhere else and still wonder if you can afford to build a life here. The city's answer is to allow more housing, especially near transit and busy commercial streets. Is it working? It's much too early to say. Changing the zoning allows more housing, but it doesn't guarantee that it will be built, or that it'll be affordable. A project can still get killed by high construction costs, interest rates, years of permitting, or neighborhood opposition. Hey, the exodus was real, and some of the people who left may never return. All right, here's where all this starts to get interesting, because people leaving wasn't an isolated event. It was part of a much larger chain reaction. If you step back and look at everything we've talked about, the fentanyl crisis, schools, transit, downtown, the budget, and the exodus, these weren't 6 completely separate problems. They all got much worse around the same time. Okay, COVID did not create every problem San Francisco has. Housing was already too expensive. Schools were already inconsistent. Addiction, homelessness, and city bureaucracy existed long before 2020. But the pandemic accelerated almost all of them. Offices emptied, transit lost their riders and their revenue, downtown businesses lost their customers, hotels sat empty, the city collected less tax revenue, families moved away, and public school enrollment fell further. City services were stretched thin at that exact same time that the fentanyl crisis was getting worse. And while city revenue dropped, the cost of providing services didn't. That's how we got into this mess. Now, this wasn't happening just in San Francisco. Cities across the country dealt with their empty downtowns and lower transit ridership, school enrollment losses, worsening addiction. But San Francisco was hit especially hard because so much of its economy depended on office workers. And because the worst problems were so visible in places visitors actually saw, San Francisco became the city everyone pointed to. So are we past the turning point? I think we're past the worst of that period, but we're not past all of its consequences. And I know San Franciscans are gonna have opinions on this. Do you feel like the city is getting any better or not yet? Tell me in the comments, I wanna know. Okay, office leasing and downtown activity are improving. Crime has fallen significantly. People are coming back, and AI has brought jobs, money, and some real optimism back into the city. But transit funding is still unresolved. The school district is still struggling. Downtown is far from full, and the fentanyl crisis is still very real. San Francisco isn't going back to exactly what it looked like in 2019. It's trying to figure out what it becomes next. So after all that, why am I still here? It's not because I think these problems are exaggerated, and it's not because I think the city has solved them. It's expensive, it's disorderly, and some of the problems will take years to fix, but I still choose to live here. There's still all these people here building things, creating things, and taking chances on ideas that might sound crazy somewhere else. And there's an incredible variety of life here. The Sunset is a quiet beach town, the Marina is young and social. Every neighborhood feels completely different. You've got the beach, the parks, incredible food, interesting people. It's all in all my other videos, right? San Francisco is becoming something different. And look, there's no guarantee all of this is gonna work. But even knowing all of this, I still believe what this city offers is incredibly difficult to find anywhere else. And if you want the other side of the story, watch my video on why I think San Francisco will thrive in the next 5 years. It's a good counterpoint to this. If you're seriously considering a move, download our free relocation guide. I'll see you at the next video. Don't forget to like and subscribe.